I'm the Director of Operations with Cool Planet Group.
Hi Ron, Colin Martin, I'm the Global Sales Director with Cool Planet Group.
Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be looking at decarbonisation, looking at reducing carbon emissions in the food and drink processing.
Yeah, so I think, Rog, correct me if I'm wrong, Ireland's got a proud heritage in the sort of food, beverage sector, particularly all those beautiful grass-fed cows you guys always keep telling me about. But like my first job was in the food and beverage sector, and scarily that's about 23 years ago now. So time waits for no man, as they say. But one of the very first projects I did was actually to install electrical meters, complemented with some previous steam meters that they'd had installed. There was actually water meters all hooked in the SCADAs and so on. That was like my remit, was to do all the monitoring of the energy, the reporting. So one of the key drivers for that as well was one of the earliest pieces of climate change legislation, which was the climate change levy in the UK. And that remit was industries are going to be hit with, I think it was about 80% tax on, well, no, it might not be as high as that, I'm getting confused with that long ago now. They're going to be hit by tax on all their energy, but the sectors, the industrial sectors, food and beverage, Scotch whisky, which I was in, negotiated an agreement that they would get an 80% rebate on the tax if they committed to making reductions on like a kilowatt hour per ton of produce produced, or in this case, litre of absolute alcohol produced. So if they agreed those targets over a 10-year period, they wouldn't get the tax. But the idea being, carrot and stick, make some changes to make it better, and so on, and improve your efficiency and so on. And for younger viewers and listeners, the reason that legislation had come into being was actually from the Kyoto Protocol, which was agreed in 1997. So we're sitting here in 2023 still talking about this. It's getting more ominous, and the news is full of the impacts of climate change and global warming. And there we go, and half an industrial career so far spent on it, and the other half looks like it will be spent on it as well. So I think we can conclude, it's a big challenge, and it's probably the challenge of our times.
Yeah, I think it's just, you have to remind me there when you go back, like I started almost, I'm going to say 10 years ago for the video, but it's actually probably 20 years ago, when I was in college. And I remember one of the first lectures I had that introduced me to sustainability. He was a brilliant guy. He was a mathematics lecturer, but I remember at the time he spoke about how the CO2 levels, the parts per million in the atmosphere, and how we had critical levels we had to adhere to. I'm pretty sure at the time he referenced that the absolute drop dead level was going to be something like 380 parts per million. That's what the target was, and if we exceeded anything like 400, that was going to be absolutely catastrophic. I think we're now up around 420, something in that bracket, Colin, are we? Something in that region?
430, 440, 450 region, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, biggest flag for me, and where I kind of came to this presentation piece, is that a full long life or a long career of all the promises. You referenced there Kyoto. There's been, the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is probably the most biggest disappointment for me in terms of those agreements, because there was so much momentum behind that agreement at the time. Like if you remember back, the Paris Agreement was made, it was in the weeks after the attacks in Paris. Remember the terrorist attacks in Paris? Yeah. And there was a lot of momentum towards, was it safe to visit Paris? Were all the various different dignitaries actually going to attend Paris? I think one of the, pride points we should have in the Irish economy is that I think the Irish Taoiseach / Prime Minister at the time was one of the first people to commit that they were going to attend. So with all those bodies attending the Paris Agreement, you would have expected a very strong ironclad agreement to be put in place, which theoretically is what was put in place, but day by day we're increasing across the board. The levels are ramping. And where does that go to? It's actually references back to, there was one particular slide that I actually came across from yourself, Colin, not that long ago. It was the slide there in relation to the actual capex investment required for decarbonisation. Yeah. And the reason why that struck me so much was because I was putting together a presentation, I saw your slide, I said, that's really good. I'm going to copy that and put it in. And then I read the figures and I went, there's a typo in there. He's got a value wrong. You know, that there's a decimal place or something incorrect. But not to quote verbatim of it, but 3.5 trillion, is it realistic? It might be accurate, but is it realistic that can never be achieved, that spend can never be achieved?
Well, I think that's where you can get into the paralysis by analysis, and you can't do anything, and it really does sort of cloud people's day. You know, we have it on calls, we go on and people, I want to talk about scope 3, which is like typically on average that's 80% of an organization or an entity's emissions that are actually basically immediately out with their control. They can, you know, there's a different conversation, but it's so big and it can be huge, you know, 80%. The ones you have in your control, your scope 1 and 2, you can make big reductions on it with proven technology and in a fairly straightforward, you know, relatively easy way, but it is still a complex undertaking. And, you know, don't get me wrong, you need all your stakeholders on a site or an organization to be buying into it, you know, to a degree. And just a little fact check from earlier, I just went on Tinternet there as we were speaking. As of the time of recording, we're at 418.88 ppm CO2 in the atmosphere, an increase of 0.6%, 2.5 ppm increase from October last year. You know, so just put it in the perspective, it's not stopping anytime soon. But getting back to that, you know, the paralysis by analysis, you know, there are a number of simple, straightforward steps, and the food manufacturing, beverages as well, is really good processes, and typically that can, you know, recover their own process waste heat. A lot of these industries tend to be fairly cyclical as well, as in circular. You know, they're bringing in water and then there's wastewater going out. You know, can that be cleaned up, reused, and so on? On the energy side, you know, often there's co-products arising, or as mentioned, you know, those industrial waste heat sources, are they getting recaptured and fed back in? So a lot of it's not, you know, putting some solar panels on the roof is a great idea. It's absolutely a good idea. From a cost savings point of view, there's also an environmental benefit to that for sure. But ultimately, you know, in the middle of winter, solar panels are not going to keep the plant running. You know, between 5 and 15% of an energy bill.
When you take that though, is the risk, like buzzword bingo, I think is a favorite, you know, phrase of mine, where you get into these meetings. I mean, like those figures that we spoke about there, like half of global corporate profits required, a quarter of total tax revenue, all those type of figures. So on one side, you've got very hard figures, you know, like massive volume of capex that has to be sourced at some point and put into this market. On the other point, you have the buzzword bingo of, you know, circular economy, you know, carbon footprints, you know, sustainable this, life cycle assessment. And the reason why I kind of end up down that road a little bit with that is, a lot of time I've come to it from, you know, no sniggers from the back, but as a professional in the, you know, sustainability sector. And I'm kind of coming from it as in, yes, we know all the background, we know the impacts of, you know, say climate change, you know, how do we make a change? How do we have an impact? I mean, you look at it from all that point and you say, right, there's a route forward. I kind of came back to it from the point of looking at, okay, when you're a client, and everyone's a client in this market, you're sitting there and everyone is saying it's going to be easy. You know, this is something we can achieve. Now, if you look at the hard and fast figures, I don't think it's going to be easy. I don't think people should be sold on the basis that it's going to be easy. But I think it's, as we've said many times before, climbing a mountain isn't easy. But if you've got a guide, an experienced guide that's been there before, that's going to make your life a hell of a lot easier. You know, Google Maps has changed my life, you know, say on a day-to-day basis. I mean, that's the whole piece of this is something straightforward is not the case. I referenced the Dean a couple of times where I'd be a big hurling fan, and you know, earlier on this year we had like an epic game, Munster final. Tony Kelly with a sideline cut in injury time to draw the match. Takes the ball over to the sideline. If he takes that shot and misses, he's gone. Right, Munster Championship missed. He goes over, puts the ball down, cuts it straight over the bar, and the guy beside me, just before he hits it, says, just put it over the bar. And the thing that always strikes me with that is, it's so easy to just say, just decarbonise your environment, just decarbonise your business. if you're the CEO of a company and if you say, I'm going to make our company net zero and we're going to heavily focus on decarbonisation, if you end up bankrupting your business in the process of that, you've done a pretty bad job. That's the focus. And I think it's the balance, to try and get that balance where you can say, okay, we've got a structured plan to decarbonisation over the coming years. We're going to use the optimum technology and we're going to get there bit by bit by following this direct route. And that's where I think we've missed a lot. When we came back earlier on, we're talking about, you know, Kyoto and Paris and all these things. I think that's been lacking in a lot of the main principal agreements that have been in place. The high level concept is great. It's the step by step, how do you actually get there, is the piece that I think that we need to focus on. Do you agree?
But yeah, pragmatic practicalities. How are you actually going to do it? And every site will be different as well, even within organisations and then in other organisations and so on. So, you know, there isn't a one size fits all for sure. And, you know, I say we're not besmirching solar panels. You should get them up if you don't have them, but they're not going to take, they're a good first step, but, you know, that's not the journey complete, you know, at that point. And I think you touched us out a little bit, not a myth, that's not fair. You can get a return, you know, an opex return, a return on investment from doing decarbonisation. You know, it's not one or t'other. I mean, we've done designs and studies and implementations of various clients in these sectors. You know, a sub $4 million investment on a site that spent about 10 million on energy. It was given over $1 million of savings, you know, for that. But it also gave a 61.5% reduction in their scope 1 emissions. It didn't involve electrification of heat, which is a great potential for emissions reduction, particularly scope 1, if you can source renewable electricity. But it didn't involve that. It come back to my earlier sort of topics I mentioned. It involved basically industrial waste heat recovery being reintroduced into their existing assets. You know, so a retrofit project that could get, you know, 60% reduction. And they're their targets, you know, that was below their 2030 targets away just with that one investment.
With a well-engineered heat recovery project, realistically, you know, capex can vary, you know, all the way up the line, you know, depending on the size of the company. But like realistically, a 3 to 4 year ROI is available for most companies on a good heat recovery project, and that can have a very significant decarbonisation impact. That be fair?
Yeah, that's fair. Again, the proof is always in the devil in the detail, as a proof in the pudding. But as a sort of rough rule of thumb, you know, given all the inflationary pressures and mechanical electrical prices, the sort of general labour shortage in EU and elsewhere, you know, the days of sub 1 year, 2 year ROI projects, you know, if you've still got sub 2 or 1 year ROI projects that you've not done, you know, that should be focused on immediately. But then, yeah, I think a typical industrial heat recovery, 3-4 years with some simple return on investment, eminently doable. And I appreciate as well, capex is always at a premium. You know, if something's going to expand production, you know, the value multiplier on that is 2, 5, 10x. You know, it's difficult to compete against that on capex. You know, so that is a challenge that organisations and everyone.
Well, with that challenge, I had I got a nice bit of downtime during the summer this year, so I got a solid couple of weeks lying in the sun with the family, in and out of the pool, nice wine, nice food, all those pieces. Every evening I'd come back to the apartment and click on the TV, and you're looking for, you know, whatever, your usual kind of viewing there for an hour or so. The problem we had was there was about 50 channels on the TV, of which one was English speaking, which was BBC World News. Now, I wouldn't be a big viewer of news at home. I generally try and avoid it for a game of football or something like that. But what was astonishing with the BBC World News is that it's kind of removed from all the local hysteria. So at the time in Ireland, we had various local hysteria, you know, kind of crisis about different blocks. But the vast majority are very much parochial kind of issues, not major international issues. BBC World News, every night, all the way through, is about the global issues. So at the time you had, in Mandra in Greece, you had massive wildfires, which has been covered every night. It was absolutely destroying, you know, say parts of the island. You had Sicily hit 46.3 degrees, I think, when we were on holidays at that point. You had Barcelona absolutely boiling, all parts across Rome boiling. We had Rhodes. I think most people remember Rhodes during the summer with the massive wildfires. So you had all these massive global challenges happening at that point. Now, the one point from me was after 2 weeks of that, in particular when you're with your family and a bit of downtime and everything else, I came back absolutely rejuvenated, saying this is it. I've never had a stronger will towards, say, climate action, decarbonisation. This is what we're going to do. Come back into the office Monday morning and bang, like a fire hose straight in the face. It's all the day-to-day activity. It's all the emails. It's all the operational different bits and pieces that we have to achieve. And it was, first of all, it was a bit of a wake-up call, but more so for me, it was a massive wake-up call to what clients are dealing with. So you were talking earlier on about heat recovery projects, etc. Maybe a 3, maybe 4 year max payback. You're looking at saying, why aren't clients engaged with that? When there's an opportunity for decarbonisation, why isn't even domestic people, still looking at solar on a bigger level? It's because the day-to-day activity consumes so much time for most people. If you've got a very large business, food and processing sector, whatever, if you're in that sector, production is a key metric. That is one of the massive metrics they have. And protecting that business is their main focus and their main day-to-day goal. So within that, it's hard for them to keep that focus on the decarbonisation journey that they want to go on. And I truly believe most people want to go on that journey. It's hard to keep on that journey and segment, or kind of veer away a little bit into decarbonisation at the same point.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that is a challenge in basically any organisation we come across, in any sector. Food and beverage is no different. That resources are lean and mean. No one's got spare bodies, and very few people have got spare capacity, to try and deal with certain things. You say the day-to-day, getting product out the door, making sure you're getting the volume targets, making sure it's in quality, making sure you got enough people to man the lines. All those sort of day-to-day challenges is very difficult to get to that focus. And then is the resources there to do front-end engineering design, engineering detail design, even deliver the projects, if that's the requirement, or you actually have the data at your fingertips, that can be a gap for a lot of people. Or you can have too much data and they can't actually see the woods for trees, or it's all in disparate systems. You got to walk around with a clipboard still people walking around with clipboards and then typing into Excel and send it to someone else who then compiles and crunches. And there's lots of ways to make everything a little bit better and free up a bit of time that can only just focus in to those kind of areas, continuous improvement areas that would help.
Is it a fair reflection, Colin, that food and drink processing, that sector in particular is very data rich, but typically quite data rich, but that the ability to gain insights from a lot of that data can be quite difficult? Would that be a fair assumption of what we've seen from a lot of sites?
Yeah, and you're normally relying maybe on a zealot to quote a phrase, relying on a zealot or a particular individual on a site who's got a bit of drive. Maybe it's a bigger site that has the luxury of having maybe a dedicated resource, in that realm of energy and process optimization, who's crunching data, maybe built some spreadsheet models and so on, and can drive that on in a particular site. But that's, that would be the exception.
Is there a bit of an elephant in the room with that as well, Colin? Like, you and me would probably be at the age profile to remember Baywatch back in good times. Baywatch taught me many valuable, important things in life, but one of the most important things Mitch Buchanan taught me was that with early stage lifeguards, you jump into the water, the number one person they have to protect is themselves, because if they don't protect themselves, they can't save anyone else. And I think if you compare that into this sector, the number one priority to protect, obviously, is they have to keep the operational business going. Production quality in this sector, QA is the absolute be all and end all. I mean, no matter how big a company you are within this sector, there's not many that could actually experience a significant quality assurance slip within their production cycle and survive it. So is that the elephant in the room, that you're looking at people saying, okay, maybe temperature profile is 1 or 2 degrees too high, maybe there's an opportunity to drop there, make savings, X, Y, and Z. But from their point of view, coming back to my Mitch Buchanan story, they have to protect the number one piece, or else they won't be trading into the future, and that is to protect quality at all conditions. Is there ever a risk to quality with these works?
That's got to be first and foremost in your mind before you do anything. What am I doing here? Is it going to impact the quality of what we're producing, or the ability to produce it in the necessary volumes or tonnages as well? So from our side, our experience, we always try to make sure we've got that front of mind when any of the solutions we develop. So that there's a couple of approaches. Do you look around the utilities that feed in compressed air and boiler, steam, hot water, refrigeration that feeds into the process? And then within the process as well, can you leave, it must be cooked at such a temperature, it must be distilled at such a temperature, or bottled at such a temperature. Can you leave that? But maybe look at, but you're exhausting at a certain temperature with a certain moisture content. Could you capture that, bring it back to the front and offset steam, hot water use that you're using, on a virgin basis at the front, so there's always a jokey anecdote is have to put into contracts that you can't just say turn the process off to deliver energy savings, because that's just not going to work. Exact same, you can't say you've saved energy by lowering 10 degrees, but your crisps are now just a soggy mass of potato in a bag. They're no longer crisps. That's just not going to work. And that's no one would ever survive.
Do you remember, Colin, we were on a certain site in Poland a number of years ago, and the plant manager, I remember he referred to the magic ton. So that plant at the point, I think it produced 20 tons of product an hour, but he used to refer to the magic ton, where there's different points in the weeks and in the months over time where they could actually increase that up to 21 ton without any impact on the process, and there was times when it was kind of restricted up and down. This magic ton concept, where they didn't have the kind of insights, they didn't have the granularity of data to understand how the production varied up and down to that element to be able to get an increased throughput. But for me, it was always a perfect example of where there was an inherent inefficiency in that system, in that cycle, that the guys just couldn't get to grips with, but it was equivalent to 5% straight away of their process that they were wasting.
Yeah, and if you've got 5% across 20 plants, that's an entire additional plant of capacity that you may have from your existing assets. And if you have maybe a live, dynamic and mechanistic hybrid model in place that can monitor that, and is maybe getting live feeds from your key critical points in that process, whether that be SCADA information or from a production system or whatever that data source may be, and you provide that to your shift team leaders or your shift leads on a timely basis in an ingestible form with insight, you could drive that efficiency. And that's that's the power of data and digitalization in making these kind of steps, because then you can be more efficient, you actually get a sustainability benefit, and you get a production output benefit, which, as mentioned, that's worth 2x, 5x, 10x energy savings and carbon reductions at that point. So
the premise of everything I suppose I'm coming to is that the big bold promise is always relatively straightforward. The delivery on decarbonisation is a major challenge. So is the first step on that journey all the way through, is it data driven?
Got to be, because you got to know what you're using, where, why and when, and then have you fully optimized the existing assets. And I keep coming back to, I think back to the projects we've implemented, the studies we've done, there's 40 to up to 80% scope 1 emissions reduction with opex savings and returns available from, not from data on its own, but from simple proven investments that can integrate back into processes. There could be heat pumps in there, as long as the coefficient of performance is above 3 and you're using electricity and gas at typical utility rates. As long as your COP is above 3, you'll get an opex saving with a heat pump. And if you're really smart, you can drive that COP up into the region of 4, 5 or 6. So you're really getting an opex saving. You've got green electricity coming in. You're getting big scope 1 reductions. You're just providing water at 60 degrees, which is what you're providing from a gas or an oil boiler previously. There's no impact on production, nothing going to happen on quality. And all of a sudden you're 50% towards decarbonising your operation through a simple proven investment. It's relatively simple technology. There's not high maintenance costs. It's not exotic. This is off the shelf. branded OEMs, if you've got temperature and profiles in the region of you use thermal energy at 60 degrees, and also you have some cooling as well, the meat sector is absolutely ripe.
When you say that, Colin,
you're halfway there.
Just even that point, I think this is one of the things that does maybe cause an issue for, maybe cause that confusion. So heat pumps, new technology, radical, just come on the market. Like, that's the consensus put out there. Heat pumps is not new technology.
No.
I mean, like, this is proven across decades, systems. You have a better technological head than me for this, but I mean, it's a refrigeration system by virtue of of their design. So there's no fear factor, particularly with the delivery of a heat pump system. Would that be a fair point?
Absolutely. In essence, it's a reverse fridge, and the internet helps me here. It's Peter von Rittinger, was an Austrian scientist who created the first working heat pump system in around about 1856.
Yeah, I mean, it picks up on, I remember at a conference a couple of years ago, there was a speaker who spoke about this new fuel, this new biomass fuel product. I was saying, I think burning timber is around more than a couple of years, with it. But yeah, kind of comes back to, the same. A lot of the technologies that are being referenced at the minute, I think the heat pumps in particular is one that have a bit of a fear factor on a lot of sites, where with the correct design, with the correct data set in place, the application can absolutely provide an incredible return on investment, very significant decarbonisation impact on a plant. That's the focus, obviously, all the way through.
Yeah.
There's definitely going to be the risk of, if you don't have the correct data insight in your design system, and you just say, oh, well, my neighbour up the road put in a heat pump, we're going to replicate the same thing, you're going to end up with poor results.
Yeah, you've got to do it from a holistic process point of view and understand the temperature profiles, what's getting consumed when, why, and match that in. So it's a bit like when we used to sell reciprocating gas engines, CHP solutions, about 20 years ago, which were a good carbon reduction measure at that time, because it used cleaner burning natural gas in the engine to create electricity that was less carbon intense than what was being supplied by the grid at the time, and you had the free heat to use as well. But if you oversize the engine, if you didn't match it to the right base load, the salesman was maybe pushing for a bigger capex sale, you could actually then be ended up costing you a lot of money and not getting the carbon benefits, so on and so forth. The same applies heat pump going into a continuous production process. You've got to match it up. You've got to holistically model exactly what's going on, what you're looking to deliver, and the best way to do that. So it's not just speak to an OEM, they'll sell you a unit, no problem at all. You've got to fit into that process, optimize it, and make sure it's going to deliver what it says. Particularly as well, if you're breaking into particularly ammonia-based, but other refrigerant systems to grab the waste heat from refrigerant systems, which is a really useful heat prime for a heat pump. That's not a straightforward undertaking.
Well, taking that then, one of the pieces that I like to do is, if you're to wrap up and put a bit of guidance behind this, and if we take off our Cool Planet hats, jackets, armbands, whatever, and say, technology agnostic, your first step to decarbonisation, where would you say the first step is?
Getting all your data into one central point or place or person, understanding what you're using, where, when, and why in your process, and optimizing the existing process, whatever that optimization may be, because it could take a number of forms. It could just be simple set point changes. You could build a model and understand, are you actually at the peak plant performance for what you have? If you're operating something at 80 degrees, it only needs to operate at 72 without impacting quality. That's a pretty straightforward change that can be undertaken relatively simply with no cost. You just need to monitor and check and make sure that it doesn't impact on product quality. And then on the sort of moving into investment sides, that'll be dictated by the data, by what you do on a plant and what you're looking to achieve as well. And as mentioned, the temperature profiles of what you're using. Are you using steam just now to create hot water? Could you just create hot water and not use the steam? Do you need to use it at those particular temperatures? Has that ever been challenged, or has it just been always the way it's done? Again, you're touching into what we talked earlier. You don't want to be impacting product quality, so on. But water at 90 is very similar to steam at 100. Why do you need steam at 100, for example?
Okay. Well, Colin, I think your reference points all the way through this have been the likes of McKinsey, UN reports, data-driven, all that kind of point. Just as a recap, I think mine have been Baywatch, Munster hurling finals, and looking at random news channels after a couple of glasses of wine. So I think that's a fair way to end on your notes then, is probably a stronger finish, would you?
I would say all information sources are valuable. It's the insight that you get from them that's the key.
Absolutely. Perfect. Okay, thanks for that, Colin. Cheers.
Anytime, Roger. Great to speak to you.